everyone. Welcome to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley, along with my co-host Michael Zucker.
Hi, everyone.
And he's the author of the Eisenhower Chronicles. And today we are welcoming historical fiction author Bonnie Blaylock to the show. And as a way of introduction, we would love for you to tell us about yourself.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here to talk with you all today. Well, I'm kind of coming late to the game to be a writer, although I started in childhood, but my first novel was just published in December of 2022. It's called Light to the Hills.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And it's historical fiction about the 1930s in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in Tennessee, so I'm kind of in the deep South.
Yeah.
And this book is set in Eastern Kentucky, so it has a lot of the dialect and flora and fauna of the region. It's just kind of a love story to Appalachia, I guess I would say.
That's wonderful. So, like, whereabouts in Tennessee? Because I'm in Georgia, so I'm not that far from you.
Oh, good. We are in Murfreesboro, which is just south of Nashville.
Oh, yeah. And you know, we're going to be at the Nashville Book Fair.
Oh, good. Yeah, good.
Yeah. So
Southern
we'll be
Festival?
Yes, we'll be there.
Awesome.
We'll have a booth with the Historical Fiction Company and Historian Press. So we'd love to have you come out and bring your books.
One of my favorite things in the fall to do is to go up to
great.
the Southern Festival.
Well, that sounds good. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your book and like the premise of it and characters and things?
Sure. So it centers on the FDR in the 30s, in the Depression, created this program called the Works Progress Administration.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to put people to work because everybody was out of work. So one of the things that they did, and specifically Eleanor, who was interested in putting women to work, was create the Pack Horse Librarian Program. And it was to send literacy and news of the outside world specifically to rural areas that didn't get a lot of that. As you can imagine, back in the 30s, most people didn't just hop on a car and travel across the country very much. So these ladies would go on mules up in the Eastern Kentucky mountains, just to the most rural, impoverished areas, because they were hardest hit in the Depression. Mm-hmm. So they didn't get a lot of education or news from the world. And in Louisiana, they would get on boats, flat boats in the bayou, and go out to the settlers there too. So the characters in my book, she is Amanda McIntyre is the Pack Horse Librarian, and she's a single mom. So she's in Eastern Kentucky, and she goes up to the people in the hills in this community, and she runs across a young lady named Sass, and Sass is turning 12. And they have an encounter in the woods. She meets their family, and Sass has an older brother named Finn who works in the coal mines up there. So the coal mines feature heavily in the story. And then they find out that they have a story in common, kind of a nasty character from their past who comes in, jumping off the trains, the con men of the time who would just sort of be takers instead of givers. And she teaches the family to read, which gives them sort of hope and brings light to their world. And through that, they sort of discover how to take care of this nasty character that comes in. So it's a very satisfying closure.
Satisfying closure. All right. So, Michael, do you have anything?
So you say it focuses on the Works Project Administration. Does the TWA have any role?
No, it doesn't. And you would think because I'm from Tennessee, you know,
that's kind of why the
no, no, just the WPA. And just in learning about that organization during the Depression and all that they did, they put artists and musicians and writers to work. It was such a huge boon for the arts. All those folks were out of work, and they built bridges and infrastructure. And it's kind of interesting that right after COVID and so many people were out of work, right after 2008 in our country, and all of that happened here, and foreclosures and people without homes and jobs, it was kind of timely. It kind of harkens back to the Depression a little bit. So
yeah. So that's one of the things I was going to ask you in doing your research for this book. like the obscure or interesting things that you discovered in your research and how it played a part in your book. Can you tell us about that?
I knew nothing about coal mining. I have
Uh,
nobody in my family did any of that. So we went to the coal mining museum up in Bentham, Kentucky, and stayed in a schoolhouse that had been converted. And the folks at the coal mining museum are actually, that's their day job, is to go back in the coal mines, and then they run the museum. So there's a makeshift mine inside the museum. Then you can go in. Um, so they let you pull this cart in there, and it's probably 4 feet high, and you're bent over. And I
wow.
lasted maybe 15 minutes in there with my cart. And so that, just the feeling of that and what that is like, and that wasn't dirty, or I wasn't breathing any dust or any of that. Really factored in. And you could talk to the folks at the counter. He's like, yeah, this is what I do every day. This is how it works.
Wow.
And the stories in that museum, the letters that men wrote uh, in cave-ins, like the rebel came down and they pulled a scrap of a paycheck from their pocket and wrote a note to their kids because that
Oh,
was the last they were going to say. Stuff, heartbreaking things
oh yeah.
about the coal mines. And one in particular, um, animals are in the story a lot. So they use horses,
Mm,
and I don't know if you know anything about horses, but they don't particularly like close, dark quarters.
right.
And they would lower these horses down the mine shaft with chain pulleys, blindfolded, until they
Oh,
got to the bottom. And then they would use them in the mines day after day, month after month. And sometimes they just didn't see sunlight or grass. So there's a lot of that, and the companionship of animals. And some people are nicer to the animals than others. So
oh, that's heartbreaking. That's already going to make me like tear up because I love horses, so I understand. That's really heartbreaking. Oh
yeah, I
goodness.
didn't know any of that. I've never heard of any of the pit ponies or any of that. So that
Yeah.
was fascinating to me. And I knew it had to go in because it was, yeah, just fascinating.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you what was the most difficult thing you found about writing this story, but that's pretty hard right there, writing
That
about
was
that.
hard. Yeah. The coal mines. And I think it was last October. It was in the news. This coal mining man from Kentucky went to a Kentucky Wildcats game. I don't know if you saw that online.
Uh-uh.
Um, his son was going to go to the Wildcats game, and he was going to make it. And he shows up, and they have a picture of him in the stands, and his face is totally black. His hands are
Oh,
black. He's just come straight from work, but he's going to sit with his little boy in the stands in the Wildcat
oh,
game. It was just such you know, like a blue collar victory that he made it there.
yeah.
And people took pictures of him, and it went viral. And the Wildcats gave him a box seat the next game, and they
Oh,
got to
how
go and
about
do it. I
that?
loved it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
that's pretty
still, those
neat.
folks are still working. I mean, that's a large chunk of our country
Yeah.
up in the mountains that they're still doing that day after day.
Isn't that amazing? You wouldn't think, and you know, but yeah, that's pretty amazing that they still do that.
Hmm.
Michael, you have any?
Well, I mean, in modern discourse, I think like coal mining has sort of become symbolic over debates over, how what direction the economy is going in and certain ways of life, especially between like rural versus urban America. Um, so I guess this is a two-part question. One is, to what extent did you have that in mind when writing this? Did that, inform how you approach the novel? And then I guess, has that had any impact in how it's been received by readers?
I don't think it's had any. I haven't heard anybody say anything about the coal mining aspect of it, other than to say many people who had relatives working in the mines resonated with them like really deeply. Yes, it was like that. Yes, it was really hard. Um, I do contrast the urban, I suppose, and the rural a bit. Like I said, it was kind of a love letter to Appalachia.
Mm.
Just the land is so important to the people who live there. They're fiercely independent. They are so strong-willed, and they do not want charity of any kind. Um, and in recent political discussions, yeah, you do hear it's those folks, the steel miners and the coal workers and people like that who like, we don't want your help. We just want work. We just need to do what we know how to do. They're very proud. Um, and I think some of that went in there. Some of that mindset definitely went in there, because when the pack horse librarian first comes and encounters the McIntyre family, they don't want her books. They don't want her help. They're just fine. Thank you very much. And folks up there, the Scotch Irish, are very much still that way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your journey as a writer, because you said that you're pretty new into the game. But so, like, what advice would you give younger writers, or if you could talk to your younger self, what advice would you give to younger writers about starting on this journey?
Somebody just asked me that yesterday, and I said I would start earlier.
Yeah.
Definitely start earlier and not be so afraid of it or afraid of the process. It can be really intimidating, and there's a huge learning
Yeah.
curve,
Yes.
not just the writing and the craft itself, but goodness, the publishing game and querying and finding an agent and writing a synopsis and how to open all those doors and gates. So just poke around and learn what you can learn
Yeah.
on the internet. Ask other people. Conferences are great places to find people. And
Yes.
generally, writers are pretty nice folks and they're willing to help you.
Yeah.
And also, like Anne Lamott says, just put your butt in the chair
Yeah.
and do it. Make
Yeah.
your appointment with yourself and keep it. And if all you get is 500 words that day, that's 500 more than you had the day before.
Yeah.
So those add up to 90, 100,000 until eventually your book is there. So yeah, don't give up in the messy middle. Don't give up when you have people criticize it. You need that.
Yeah.
You really need that help
You
and
do.
that input from other people. So I know it's hard when your words are your babies and your characters are your children, but
Yeah.
they need help too. So take it.
Yeah, that's absolutely very, very true. Can you tell us what prompted you to go on this journey to start writing?
Well, like I said, I kind of have always written a little bit since childhood and read everything I could get my hands on. And you're supposed to write the book that you want to read. So
That's it.
I
Yeah.
read everything from screenplays to mysteries to science fiction, all of it. And I think you can get nuggets of the writing craft from each of those genres. When I first graduated, I did technical writing, which is really boring and very dry, but science research, I did that for Oak Ridge National Laboratory up in Oak Ridge in Eastern Tennessee for a while, and then sales writing and all of that stuff does hone your exactness and your craft and the way you put things together on paper. But then I had kids. We owned a veterinary business for 20 years. So that was kind of put on the shelf. And once the kids left for college, I actually had a free part of my brain back and decided,
Yes.
I think it's time. I'm going to do this and see what comes of it. So Light to the Hills is actually my second novel. The first one is completely different. It's a thriller with science and art and history, and that one's still on the shelf. That was kind of a practice run, dry run, maybe.
Yeah.
But once I learned I could do that and get the 100,000 words, then I thought, okay, well, I'll just do it again. And there's an interesting nugget that came up about the pack horse librarians, and I thought, I've never heard of that, and I love to learn when I read, so I'm gonna write that story.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Michael, do you have?
Well, so you mentioned you've read of a lot, various genres and styles. Do you have either a favorite historical fiction novel or film that sort of captured what you were either aiming for, or was just an inspiration for writing this?
A favorite. I love Southern fiction in general. So anything that is set in the South, it has just such a sense of place. I'm trying to bring to mind.
How about Nail? Did you like Nail?
Silas Hart. I'm sorry.
Oh, did you like Nail? Do you remember
Yes.
Nail? Yes.
Yes. Silas House is awesome. Ron Rash, I love him. Just people who write, who get the sense of place. And the South and the Appalachia tend to be like the hillbilly elegy tends to be really stereotyped. And all the bad parts. You get this, you're from Georgia.
Uh-huh.
You know, they're backwards, they're barefoot and pregnant all the time, they're not very
Yeah.
educated, all of the stereotypes. And when someone can write about it and get to the heart of the people and see the beauty in some of the brokenness, I just think that's my favorite. When I can
Yeah.
read that and it resonates, that's my favorite.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with that. So let me, so because that was one of the questions I was going to ask. I'm so glad you asked that about something that impacted you as a writer. So let me ask you this. Do you have like a particular saying or quote that you live by as a writer or as a person?
Hmm. Wow, that I live by as a writer or person. Um, I think just not to be afraid to do it. Perfect love casts out fear. So, um, when you shouldn't worry so much. I guess this is a lesson learned from living certain number of decades. We won't say how
Yeah.
many, but after a while, you care less about what people think of you. You care less
Yes.
about appearances. You're just um, life is shorter on the right side than it has been. You have less left, so you have to just cast that aside and go for it. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? I guess I used to live in kind of an even if, excuse me, in kind of a what if um, mentality. What if it's not good enough? What if nobody reads it? What if,
Yeah.
um, what if it's trash and garbage and everybody makes fun of me and all of the things? But I've really switched in the past probably 10 years to an even if mentality. Even if no one ever sees it in the world, I'm going to do it anyway. It's for me.
Yeah.
Even if it never sells a copy, that's okay. It's for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Um, and you have to just push through that, I
You
think, as
really
a
do.
writer. You cannot worry about
Right. No, you
sales
can't.
numbers or, any of the rest. It has to be for you
Yeah.
and your story.
I think that's great that you've learned that now because, that is one of the things that younger writers or those that are first starting out have a problem with. I did. I remember feeling that. And so I think that's great that you've learned that early on in your
Took a
writing
while,
career.
it took too long,
Oh,
probably.
okay. So can you tell us anything about what might be coming up? What are you working on now, or is there anything upcoming?
I hope so. I'm working on it's another historical fiction, but this time it's set in Italy. Three generations of women starting in the 20s, and they are responsible for this particular kind of weaving, sea silk, and they
Oh,
pass it from mother to daughter. And it's gone back to ancient times. So now we're in Italy in the 1950s, and there's only one person left who knows how to do the craft,
oh,
and
wow.
she's not so interested. So it's kind of about
Oh,
mothers and daughters and what we put on our children to carry. So
oh, that's really good. So that kind of plays into your podcast. Can you tell us about your podcast?
yeah, a friend and I for a couple of years have done a podcast called Just Ask Your Mom, and it's all about family and parenting and marriage and all the stuff. We're pretty honest and, and
That's
out there
great.
about it. So yeah,
Well, we'll definitely put a link to that so that some of our listeners they can read your book and then they can go to your podcast and get some parenting advice.
sure, fantastic.
Well, you have anything else, Michael?
Yeah, I was interested in asking, so as far as, when listeners, when they're sort of weighing, picking this up, just what they can expect in terms of, what preferences do you have in terms of the approach to writing between, let's say, characters versus plot, dialogue versus prose, like what your preferences are?
And this book in particular, In Light to the Hills.
Yeah, or just a general, every writer kind of has their preferences or strengths and weaknesses, and just whichever you think, you know, readers can expect to kind of see their favorite elements represented.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would say this is particularly character driven. It's probably more on the literary side than
Oh, great.
a plot driven sort of mystery. There is a bit of a mystery in it. Um, there is some murder and all that sort of stuff. So that factors heavily into the plot. But at its heart, it is about character, how they interact with each other, and how the community interacts together, and how it all falls out at the end with literacy, and it's kind of uplifting. It's hopeful at the end. The dialect, there is dialect, which made it interesting to choose the audio version because
Yeah,
not everyone can do a great Southern accent, but
that's
I
true.
did a great job picking the reader. So I listened to I'm not really, I live in the South, but I was raised in the military. So I lived all over. I wouldn't say I have a really heavy Southern accent, but my father-in-law does. And I listened to him and his stories. And a lot of the dialect that is in this book comes from just family stories sitting around the backyard. So, and I've been told that it's pretty, like, how did you know that those sayings are in there? How did you know that people actually talk that way? So yeah, if you like the vernacular, then there's a lot of that in there too.
Oh, that sounds great. I'm going to read it now because, definitely anything Southern. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show today. We've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. It was fun.
Absolutely. We're really excited for your books and wish you much success on this book. And as always, for more information on Bonnie's books, you can click on the link in the description or go to her website at bonnieblaylock.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, as next week's episode features author Maggie Brooks. Thank you to our listeners and to our viewers. This is Dee Marley and
Michael Zucker.
Keep making history and keep listening.